About 7 years ago, I attended a presentation at South by Southwest by some movie industry executives, and they demonstrated a movie script that had been created by artificial intelligence. It was magnificent. It was in the fantasy genre, sort of like Lord of the Rings. And I asked one of the executives, if this could do such a good job, why wasn't this broadly available? Why wasn't it being used everywhere? And he said, the industry isn't ready to say we don't need human writers anymore. Ever since that moment, I've been waiting for some company to pull the trigger and unleash artificial intelligence in a way that could be broadly applied to our businesses, our lives, and our creative processes. That day came last week when OpenAI introduced a very user-friendly version of its GPT-3 technology called GPT Chat. This quickly took the internet by storm. 1 million people signed up in the first 5 days and were instantly creating poetry, song lyrics, college-level essays, research papers, computer code, business plans, and more. When I tried this for the first time, it was like the moment I clicked onto the internet for the first time. I had a feeling I was entering a vast new space of opportunity and perhaps peril. This is significant enough that I needed to create this special episode of the Marketing Companion and enlist the help of my friend, Shelly Palmer, to make sense of this development. Unless you're living in a cave, you probably know Shelly as one of the most respected and innovative minds in the tech space. He's an author. He's also a very accomplished music composer and producer. He's a revered tech analyst, keynote speaker, and consultant. I recommend his newsletter all the time, and I also recommend his new venture, Meta Academy. This is a resource everybody should try. Sign up for it. I will put the links to that in the show notes. So Shelly, I'm so honored to be talking to you today to help me unravel these new developments.
Nice to be here. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. I think
Is this me or is this an AI version of me? That's a question.
Everything's been changed.
Oh.
So in your live stream this week, you described your initial experience with GPT chat as mind-blowing and profound. So I assume you agree with me that this is something, we're entering a new era here.
We've been here. I think it's become commercialized in a way that people are just warming up to. In January of 22, which is CES, I always say last year, but of course it's still 2022.
Yeah.
CES 2022, we did our annual Innovation Series Summit for 2022. And I wanted to do a section about AI and deep fakes. And I specifically wanted to make a political commentary by leveraging Carl Sagan's writings, because Carl called some of the things we're into right now decades in advance. Very smart guy with prescient points of view and brilliant insights. Sadly, taken too young. So he never said in a speech the passage I was interested in. What I did was I sent samples of his writing off samples of his speeches to a friend of mine with a very, very good speech replication AI model. Wow. And I took gave them the passage I wanted that he had written but never spoken. And if you go to ces21.shellypalmer.com, you'll see a link to my YouTube link to the 10-minute keynote. And it includes this Ken Burnsy style photo montage, if you will, of Carl Sagan as he speaks his words in his voice that he never spoke but wrote. Now, that was a year ago, basically, just this past Tuesday, and that would be in early December of 2022. So basically 12 months later, more or less. ChatGPT shows up completely on my doorstep, and all I'm dealing with is hundreds of texts and hundreds of email messages every single day. Shelly, this is awesome. This is unbelievable. This is like child of GPT-3. You have to deal with it. It's unbelievable. It writes this, and all the things you said in the intro. I'm like, okay, I'm very familiar with this tool, and I'm very familiar with the people who are working on the model. I haven't tried it in its current form. Let me see. So I did something I don't think I was ever going to do or imagined that I would ever do, Mark. And this is the part that I think changes absolutely everything. And I don't, that is a bold claim. So
Yeah.
it requires bold evidence. So let's go there now. Bold claim, bold evidence. I've been talking for years about how humans and machines will need to partner. You and machine partners will become better work. You and your AI coworker will be a better worker than just you by yourself or just the AI by itself. That there are certain things that humans are extremely good at and certain things that machines are extremely good at. And if you put those two things together in a good way, you get a superhuman. Now, the analogy is generally like this. In the beginning of the industrial age, the steam shovel and steam engine amplified the capacity of our muscles by thousands of times. And the world around us is built substantially by those machines. If you look at skyscrapers, sure, somebody built the pyramids and they probably didn't have, the help of the steam shovels and steam engines, but you don't build the Empire State Building with thousands of people unless they have machines. You don't build the New York, you don't build New York City as it sits here without those machines. The world around us is substantially owed, what we see physically, to this amplification of our muscles. And I've always said metaphorically that AI amplifies the power of our minds by thousands of times. And it is no more a replacement for us than a jackhammer is for the person who wields it. The jackhammer sitting on the sidewalk isn't really going to do anything by itself. Now you say, well, if I give it to an AI robot and tell her, the robot's going to stop all that. There are things humans do. There are things computers do. And I've got an article from two articles from 2017. Also, you could find at shellypalmer.com. Two most popular articles I've ever written. One is called The 5 Jobs Robots Will Take First. And the other, a week later, is The 5 Jobs Robots Will Take Last. And it's worth a read because it's kind of a funny, and it's just me talking about things I think AI will be able to do and things I don't think they'll be able to do. Can an AI teach you? Absolutely. I've been learning by AI for a long time. If you're 5 years old and you scrape your knee in kindergarten, do you want a robot to hug you? Probably not, at least not any robot that's in current manufacture. So there are things that people will do and there are things that machines will do, and that's what it is. All right, without further ado, I go to ChatGPT and I say, all right, write 200 words about why Facebook is warning that it could ban news in the US if Congress passes a bill that will require the platform to negotiate with and compensate publishers for their content, dash in the style of Shelly Palmer. Now, all fairness, I wrote in the first part at 300 words without the in the style of Shelly Palmer, and I got an essay that would be worthy of a 7th grader. It violated Rule 17 of Strunk and White's Elements of Style, which is my Bible. And
cut unnecessary words.
Omit needless words, omit needless words, omit needless words. Rule 17. So it was very verbose, and it wasn't tight, and it was like, it just had sentences in there that made my skin crawl the way that I personally would have written in 7th grade or 8th grade, or maybe even 9th grade. Mr. Riley cured me of that. Thank you, Mr. Riley, wherever you are. But anyway, world's greatest English teacher. Anyway, so I realized I've written over 19,000 blog posts in my life. And while technically ChatGPT doesn't have access to the internet currently, and it's only trained up through, I think, 2019.
2021.
Okay, it's read a ton of the internet. Well, I got a ton of stuff in my style with my byline. So pretty decent chance it's read some of it. It turns out I was right, because when I told it the same thing, I limited it to 200 words. So it would be more like my daily rant. I'm just going to read you the first part of this. This is written by ChatGPT. As Facebook faces increasing pressure from lawmakers and regulators over its handling of misinformation and other controversial content, the company has warned that it could ban news altogether in the US if Congress passes a bill that would require it to negotiate with and compensate publishers for their content. Now, that's my question restated, right? Then it goes on, and this is what stopped me in my tracks. The proposed Journalism Competition and Preservation Act would allow news publishers to collectively negotiate with online platforms such as Facebook and Google for compensation for their content, granting them an exemption from antitrust laws in the process. And then it goes on, wait a minute, I didn't mention the JCPA in my question to it. It did the research that it needed to do, that I would have done. It paraphrased the question, stated the thesis for me, gave me a decent topic sentence, gave me a supporting sentence for my topic, my main paragraph, gave me great supporting, it's perfect 5-paragraph essay form, and it's tight in a style that I would write. So much so I instantly recognized it as something I would write. And Mark, at that moment, I got scared. It's just that simple. I was like, wow.
Well, that sort of leads us to the next issue here, because there's a million ways we could go with this. It scares me a little too. And here's why. Because you're someone, I mean, I have my own instincts that I don't necessarily trust, but I trust your instincts. And what you said, I believe it was in your rant, I am 80% replaced. And it's funny. I have a friend who's a marketing consultant, and 5 years ago, I said, "How worried are you about AI replacing you?" He said, "It's 5 years away." And I wrote him an email today. I said, "You were right." It was 5 years away.
So,
Now,
it's the word replace is interesting because right now it is a tremendous enhancement and a time saver, and it's
sure.
productivity. It just increases productivity in such a profoundly beautiful way. And by the way, like Wikipedia, when it's right, it's right. And when it's wrong, it's really wrong. So it's not doing your work for you.
Yeah.
But remember, this is the first day of this, Mark.
Right.
This isn't like
It's the first thing. And here's the other thing. Like, I was testing it, and I actually got into a one-on-one chat with it.
Yeah, that's what it is, a chat.
I said it made this comment, and they made a comment. It said, "Thank you for being patient with me. I'm still learning." And I said, "What do you mean you're still learning?" I said, "Well, they said, well, I'm learning from you. I'm learning from every interaction." So I think that's one of the things that people are overlooking. We don't need millions of developers to correct these mistakes. It's correcting itself as it's
I think that is an important that's an important point. It needs to be slightly honed in the following way. There are different kinds of machine learning. There is supervised learning, which is precisely and exactly what it sounds like. There's a big pile of data, and you say, I'm looking for a needle in a haystack. This is what the needle looks like. Go see if you can find it. Okay, once you've learned what that is, go see how many more there are that look just like it, and how many look kind of like it. And supervised learning is an area of machine learning that we see often, because very often you know what you're looking for. But very often you've got a monstrous amount of data. And what I mean by big data is 25,000 columns by 250 million rows, right? If I give you a 10 by 10 spreadsheet and I say, hey, Mark, here's a 10 by 10 spreadsheet about your business. Within seconds, you're going to look at it and go, oh, I understand. This is blank. This is blank, because you know your business. And if I'm describing your business in 10 columns and 10 rows, you will really have a solid insights about what that is, whatever your business might be. But once I get to thousands of columns and millions of rows, you're a human. You can't interpret that. So very often we're just looking for stuff, and it's more of an enhanced search than anything else. Then there's unsupervised learning, where you say, hey, there's a big pile of data here. Go see if there's anything interesting in there. Like, you see any patterns? And the computer goes in there and looks all around, and the AI model tries to figure out if there are patterns of interest, whatever they may be. But all of these work when you are in a machine learning or an artificial intelligence environment. the main way you train these models is what's known as reinforcement learning, and it works the same way that a newborn baby works metaphorically. Newborn baby picks up a rattle, not newborn, call it a toddler picks up a rattle. It shakes it. Ooh, it makes a noise. It bangs it on the floor. It's hard. It bangs it on its head. Ow, it hurts my head. Tries to eat it. Like, it does all this trial and error stuff. So deep learning and neural networks and all these algorithms are basically doing trial and error to try and figure out what the best answer is. And then when it gets the right answer, you give it a cookie. Good, and you pat it on the head, you go, good computer, good answer. And when it gives you the wrong answer, you go, no, bad, stick your nose in it, like, don't do that. It's literally that kind of reinforcement learning. And so when we say the computer learns, it does learn, it can forget, it has a limited capacity. Many of these models have a limited capacity to store memory forever. They can be taught to score things above other things. And so if misprogrammed, and this is the most important part, whether the programmers add too much bias to the model or whether it's trained on biased information, it can be overtrained and tricked. And there are very profound examples of this. There was and again, this may not apply to ChatGPT because we've evolved over the years, but just a few years back, there was a really interesting set of circumstances that occurred, and it was all over the internet. You'll find it if you search. I've written about it. I think a couple others have also written about this. There was an AI model that was looking for cancer cells on skin. I think they're called melanomas, or they're, things on your arm and little that could become cancerous or are cancerous, skin cancers of different types. And so they could, cameras are optical and can see certain things, but computers can analyze pixels in a way that human eyeballs can't. So they were using an AI model to see if it could identify skin cancers early by looking at pictures of moles and blemishes on the skin. So people would go and they would take pictures of their arm or whatever the area was that had this blemish or mole on it, and they would put it in, and there was metadata. Did they or did they not, have cancer? And that was how they were training the model. And then a lot of dermatologists and doctors and oncologists sent in pictures as well. So it got very good at identifying what they believed was identifying these melanomas in really an unusually accurate way. But as it turns out, pictures taken in doctors' offices have rulers and are very well lit. And the rulers are there for scale so that you can measure the size of the lesion or the blemish or the mole. And of course, the lighting is because it's a professionally taken photograph, a medical grade photograph meant for a doctor to share with other professionals who might be able to understand it. Whereas when people were at home taking pictures of their arms, they thought they might have cancer. They had no lighting was whatever it was, and there generally wasn't a ruler in the picture. Well, it turns out the AI was biased to the ruler, not to the cancer cells. And they had the same exact thing with sheep. They were teaching an AI model to recognize sheep. The vast majority of the images had sheep in meadows, big green fields. And so the AI was heavily biased towards the large grass meadows, not the actual sheep. They didn't know what sheep were, just knew that if they have a lot of white tufty things in green meadows. Now, can you solve for that? Yes. Can you train around that? Yes. But the bias, that being biased to the green meadow or biased to the ruler, you'd have to really think hard about that before you understood what was going on. It's not obvious, especially if it's getting the cancer diagnosis right more often than not. I mean, that's just really hard for humans to sit back and go, well, there's no bias here. It's like human bias and AI bias are not the same thing. They just aren't. So again, this is very early days. We are learning how humans are learning how reinforcement learning can be beneficial. It does learn. One of the things you can do at ChatGPT, which I think is magnificent, is if you hit the like button after you're done, you can put in what you would have written to make it better.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And
I hadn't explored that yet.
That is training the model, because now it knows what it wrote, and you can ask it to try again and try again. You can have it, so ultimately it gets really, really better by
Yeah.
use.
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting about this is that one of the things it's obviously very, very good at is taking a lot of data and fitting it into patterns like a creator would. And so as I'm starting to think about the implications of this, if you're a content creator, if you're a copywriter, you've got to be pretty nervous right now. And I'm even thinking about patterns in terms of my consulting practice. Marketing, one of the beautiful things about marketing is there are sort of foundational elements that can be applied to lots of different problems. And that's what AI is good at. So I wonder if you've had time to sort of process this from a psychological perspective. It's almost like in 1 week, someone's like opened up Pandora's box. It's like, oh my gosh, this is kind of existential in some ways. How do I start to, come to grips with this in terms of my career? Have you thought about this for what it means to you and others?
Yeah, Mark, this is my lived experience. And a few weeks ago, I got pilloried by the fine art community for making a comment that angry artists were trying to kill AI. And
I remember that post.
and
Yeah.
so many people got up in my face. And one of the most interesting things is a guy came at me on Twitter saying that, and I said, look, man, I'm one of the pioneers of electronic music.
Yep.
And I have an awful lot of patents, and I have an awful lot of hours into music synthesis. I was one of the very, very first local 802 members that was considered an electronic music synthesist for local 802 in New York, the Musicians Union. When I got in the business, which was in the late 70s, actually mid to late 70s, they had to make the category for me. And
That's great.
it was mandated that I receive union scale for every single part I played on my synthesizer. So if I came in and I replaced a string section, I got paid scale. Then if I had to play a brass part, I got paid scale. If I played percussion, synthetic percussion, I got paid scale. I would walk out of a session with 10 other musicians and I'd have 10 scale wages lines, and they would have 10, one for each, and I'd have 10 personally. About 5-7 years later, because they thought I was putting people out of work, and the union didn't want to be cheaper for producers. They wanted the producers to pay the same money. Why? Because the union got union dues off of my pay scale. They got health and welfare contributions and pension and welfare contributions off health fund, health insurance and pension fund, plus the union dues itself, because they all, union takes a bit of money every time you make money. So they didn't want to lose any of that. Ultimately, the producers a few years later, probably the early 80s, negotiated double scale for synthesists. And there were now plenty of synthesists out there because synthesizers were no longer something that came in giant cases and you'd have lugged around by roadies. They were starting to be made commercially available, where any keyboard player could have various synthesizers that they could take with them to gigs. And the industry exploded. So what happened? Digital audio workstations, which we were pioneering at the time, became the way that you started to do business. Now, prior to, call it 1982, maybe 1980, prior to maybe 1980, you wanted to do a session for a television commercial, you were putting a band or a lot of musicians, if not a band, a small studio orchestra in a studio. You'd have a rhythm section, string section, horn section. Maybe they play together, maybe they play separately. So you'd have track separation. But one way or the other, it was not unusual. Somewhere between 5 and 15 players and 6-8 singers on any given jingle that I'd ever work on. By 1986, when we put creative audio recording studios online at 19 West 36, which was the first commercially available tapeless recording studio in the world, it was completely digital audio workstation based. And we did the first commercial in April of 1986 that didn't have any tape. It ended up being, it was a BMW commercial for BBDO, the agency, and first edition editorial. And it was the first time anybody had ever done a soundtrack for a television commercial with no tape involved at all. No film and no tape, all digital. the number of musicians that we were using had gone from 600 a year with maybe 600 players and about 90 singers, down to about 300 players and 90 singers. And
in the first year.
In the first year of being fully, totally, completely digital. Now, two things were interesting, and this is the most important part. And again, you can say, well, that's not like AI. It's like, it's exactly like AI because it's just tools. Tools are making things more efficient. Mm-hmm. I thought, and this is so funny, we thought we would charge $1,000 an hour. The average studio could be had for anywhere from $50 to $200, $250 an hour back then. Recording studio. We thought we'd charge $1,000 an hour for Studio A because it's digital and no one ever had it so good, and because there's no rewind time and there's no tape to rewind, and you're saving all, like, you just get done fast. And so something that would have taken you 2-3 hours prior to inventing this technology and creating this environment could take you like an hour. And for mixes, for film mixes, for commercials, you generally do a half with a possible half. It's the way you would book it. We would sell $500 half hours with a buffer zone of a half hour. And we thought because of the time savings, we'd just be selling a lot of half hours, and we'd use the other half hour to like reset and do a little maintenance, vacuum the floor, clean the ashtrays, whatever it's going to be. People, once they realized they could press a button and change something, listen to it 3 different ways, not only did the time expand because people wanted to try 1,000 different things where they used to only, you needed to, in the old days, you would preconceive what you wanted. And when you got it close to what you were thinking in your head, okay, we're done, let's go. But here, you were done, like, as soon as you were done, it's like, could we try it without strings? Could we try it with the strings doubled? Could we try it when the voiceover has a big echo? Could we have a little echo? Could we, like, everything? And okay, could you print that? Could you print that? Could you print? We ended up dubbing, meaning making copies of 20, 30, 40 versions where we used to send 2 or 3. They would ask for 20 or 30 versions for them to think about, and they would sit there for hours. It was exactly the opposite of what we thought would happen. Here we are, more efficient and more and better in every way.
Yeah.
And if you came in trained, properly trained, like if you knew what you wanted, you could get it in 30 minutes and go home and be done for $500. We started seeing people there 2, 3, 4 hours at a time, taking 20, 30 versions out of it. And what fascinated me is that this repeated itself in every place that technology increased productivity. What it allowed you to do was, depending on your ego, get either really lazy or really creative. And then happy accidents happen, right? It's like, did you do that? Or is that a function of the engineer pressing a few buttons and saying, have you tried this? Have you thought of this? Oh no, but that's exactly that's amazing. That was just what I was thinking. How can you tell the difference between a real producer, a genius producer, and a total hack who's posing? You can't.
Yeah.
Because the technology was doing so much of the work. And so what I think is going to happen here, from my lived experience, is that this tool will dramatically enhance the capabilities of those who embrace it. It will turn a lot of people who don't embrace it into employees of, let's just say, other professions that don't pay as well. And for those who are usually not in the game, and this is the part I think I love the most, when I learned to play, I was beating the physical limitations of my muscle memory, of my muscle capability, of my ears, of my embouchure. You make the saxophone play in tune by beating the physics of it, and it's called your musical style, and you practice relentlessly every single day, and you try to copy guys that play great. And if you like, there's this whole process of you mimicking the music you've heard and trying to beat your own physiological problems and the physics obstacles, and that creates your musical style. Well, now people don't have to go through that. If you have the historical context or the intellectual context or the creative context to say, I want Frank Sinatra to sing New York, New York, hanging off the Empire State Building, flipping the bird at King Kong while he rescues, like, if that's what you want to do, and then
Mhm.
the AI just draws it for you or does the
Yeah.
animation. And if
Yeah.
you say, and I want the score to be done, Avicii meets Taylor Swift at Willie Nelson's house, and Bach shows up for a cameo. Now, those are nonsense terms, but maybe that's the most creative thing that you've ever seen in the
Yeah.
world. This technology, Mark, I think is going to empower people who have great ideas or even terrible ideas, people with ideas without skills other than their imagination. And I got to tell you, unlocking the imagination of just every person, I just think that's awesome. Like, what a fantasy. Think it, tell the computer, and then have it happen. Wow.
Yeah. What a
Wow.
wonderful sentiment
I mean,
to
that's just awesome.
sort of
So
wrap
yeah, you can
things.
hate it. People are going to
Yeah.
hate it. Not me.
It's a great sentiment to sort of wrap things up here. And I love what you're saying. And it's such a great analogy from the early days of music that, look, you've got to embrace it. I mean, you just can't fight it and you can't ignore it. Spend a day being pissed off because your job has changed, but the next day, go fight and see what else is there. And the other thing, you were talking about making all the images and everything. What I've observed is that the most magnificent images coming out of AI are manipulated by artists who really know what they're doing. Most of my images still don't have fingers, but the people who have that great creative capacity, that's never going to, I think, go away. You're going to be able to manipulate the technology just like you did with music in new and amazing ways. Shelly, I'm so grateful for your time today, and most of all for your wisdom. I mean, nothing can replace that sort of experience that you have and the wisdom you can apply to this this new development that's amazing and scary for a lot of people, as you said. So thank you. I'll put all your links in the show notes. Thank you for spending this time with us today.
My pleasure. You take care.
All right. Thanks, Shelly.